So imagine being Solomon today. It's almost like a scene from Aladdin. The genie comes and says, "You have 3 wishes. What do you want?" The Lord comes to Solomon and says, with arms open wide, this is God himself saying, "Ask for whatever you want." How would you answer that? Maybe we might just, gut reaction is, well, yeah, I'd say I want God. I want to be like Solomon here in the beginning, not at the end. But then, if you really start looking into your heart, you might notice that there's maybe a part of your heart that maybe wants something else. What do we want? What do we seek? I want to just win the lottery. I want to be able to not have any more pain in my life. I want to be able to go to Disneyland every single day of the year. As a child, I'd probably want ice cream every single day. But what we see here is very much like this treasure in the field. Whatever that treasure is that we're willing to hide, to protect, to make sure that no one steals it from us. And then we get rid of everything else in order to have that. That tells us where our heart really is. And if you're like me, you'll notice that there's some sort of disconnect within our heart. There's part of our heart that is saying, I want God. I want my heart to be molded so that it only fits Him. Almost like one of those cookie cutters that you just take and then you're able to create the shape right there. Imagine your heart being etched and molded and formed and things taken away in order for it to be shaped like Him. So then only He's the only one that will fill that place and nothing else can fit in there. But if you're like me, you probably recognize that our heart is not fully shaped like this just yet. And there are other things that still want to have space. This is what the second reading talks about. God wants to work all things for good to conform us to the image of His Son. He doesn't want our heart to be the image of ourselves. He wants it to be more and more conformed, little by little, so that it only is shaped like Christ. That's what it means in the scriptures where it says, I will give you a new heart and a new spirit. He wants to give you a Christ-shaped heart. So how do we go from point A, which is maybe where we're at right now, where our heart is kind of shaped like that, but maybe not exactly, to fully shaped that way? Gift of wisdom. First reading talks about, again, Solomon. The Lord saying, what do you want? Do you want wealth? Do you want power? Do you want the pleasures of life? He could have asked for any of those things, but he said, give your servant, therefore, an understanding heart, to judge your people and to distinguish right from wrong. He was asking for the gift of wisdom. Now, very sadly, we know about the end of his story in which he didn't hold on to that gift of wisdom. But at this moment right now, it's important for us to imitate Solomon's example. Because what he asks for is the ability of knowing how to use these other things that are placed in our life that are not necessarily bad or good. But if we don't know how to use them wisely, they can destroy us and they can destroy one another. And these are these threefold temptation that you see in the Garden of Eden, you see in the golden calf below Mount Sinai. You actually see Jesus being tempted in the desert. And that is the pleasures of life, riches, and power. And if you think about them, all of those things are not bad. It's not bad to experience pleasure. When you eat ice cream, you shouldn't feel guilty, even though, sometimes it says it's sinfully delicious and stuff like that, but that's just weird advertisement. But that joy of eating chocolate chip cookie dough is something that the Lord gave us as a gift. Power is not a bad thing if it's used rightly. We have the image of saints who are also kings and queens. St. Louis, for instance, who, very sadly, there's this controversy over taking his statue down, but unfortunately, there's a misunderstanding in history of understanding who he was, that he was this amazing king that really sought to defend those that were oppressed, that were poor, that were in need. He's the very person that we should be looking to say we need to have our leaders look like that. And so power is not necessarily bad. It is given to us by God, and we have to use it rightly. Wealth is another thing. People that receive material blessings, it's not a bad thing in and of itself, as long as you use it wisely. But again, those three gifts in the world, when the fall happened, when Adam and Eve sinned, and there was this shockwave of sin that started to infect everything, it infected these very beautiful things of pleasure, power, and riches, and started to make them have minds of their own. We call this concupiscence, this way in which there's this tendency that if we don't have wisdom, it's going to go off course, and it's going to get us in trouble, and it's going to hurt a lot of people as well. Wisdom is the gift of being able to rise up and be able to see those things and how to use them in a way that brings us closer to God and brings others closer to God. This is the principle of St. Ignatius of Loyola, where he talks about the doing all for the greater glory of God. He says that the things of this life, to the extent that they lead me to praise, honor, and reverence God, to serve Him, to bring others to Him, I should accept and use. And that includes pleasure, power, and riches, to the extent that it leads me towards God and leads others towards God. But to the extent that they become something that takes me away from God and takes other people away from God, that I need to reject them. So wisdom is being able to be, in a sense, like a hot air balloon during the American Civil War that was used as observation. That was the first Air Force, in which they would rise up above the battle line, and then they were able to see from a bird's eye point of view where all the troops were. And then they would know how to be able to fight that battle. When a general is just right on the ground level, and they're looking, they don't know how everything fits together, and they can get themselves in a lot of trouble. That's why they use reconnaissance airplanes, satellites, hot air balloons. Wisdom is like the hot air balloon. It allows us to see from God's perspective and how to distinguish right from wrong. How do I use this earthly thing in a way that doesn't destroy, but that preserves life? So let's look at each of those things. Let's just look at pleasure first of all. If pleasure is our end, and if our life is orientated towards, I am in this world to get the most out of it, the he who has the most toys in the end dies kind of thing wins. If that's all that it is, well, pleasure is something that's very much focused on ourselves. Pleasure should be a cause, or sort of like a consequence of doing something right. But if that's the end in and of itself, it's something very, very fickle. And even people who do horrible things can also get pleasure out of that, so pleasure shouldn't necessarily be the end result. And also, if you base even relationships on pleasure, which unfortunately I think many of our maybe more recent marriage crisis right now is many couples may be entering into marriage more on the sense of in-loveness, and not necessarily built on virtue or built on something that's going to last a little longer. And so the moment that the feelings go, if the relationship is more about how does this person make me feel, then once that person's feelings are gone, then it's like, well, I don't need you anymore. And that's why Pope Francis would call the throwaway culture. So pleasure can, if that's our goal, and if we don't know how to use wisdom to say, well, how do I do the right thing so that the pleasures of life will only be things that will acknowledge the good thing? If we don't do that, then we actually get ourselves into a lot of trouble. There's a lot of brokenness that's there, but also we just become bored. We become empty. Imagine if you went to Disney World every single day of the year. You would just become empty. If you just ate ice cream every single day of the year, you'd get sick. And it's the same thing. If you're just overwhelmed with saying all of life is about getting the maximum amount of pleasure, then you're just going to end up being bored. So wisdom helps us know how to guide that area. Riches. Wealth. Do you wish that you won the lottery? Is that maybe a secret dream that you have? I would never wish that on anyone, actually. I remember hearing a story of someone who won the lottery and said, you know what, I'm going to give a whole bunch to Jesus. I'm going to be able to do all this good. But the moment they had it, they didn't have wisdom to know how to use it. And they started giving it away in ways that they attracted the wrong sort of people. They gave a whole bunch of stuff to their granddaughter. This is actually a true case that happened 20 years ago. A whole bunch to their granddaughter. Their granddaughter didn't know how to use this money, and so really had a whole bunch of thugs that basically surrounded her, got her into drugs. She actually ended up taking her life. The family turned against this person who won the lottery, and then the person just became angry and just became a black hole. And that's how they ended their life. Because they won the lottery. They didn't know how to use it. That's like the touch of King Midas, if you know that story in which he says, I just want the power of anything that I touch, turn it into gold. But then when he reached for his own daughter, she became gold. Anything that he ate or drank, he couldn't, because it all turned into gold. Wealth is a powerful gift if you use it wisely to build others up, to create things that help and heal others. But if you don't have wisdom, it destroys you and others around you. Power. How do we use the authority, the earthly authority that's entrusted to us? If we don't have wisdom, we can make some really, really dangerous decisions. I'm going to share a story, actually, just in closing. It's actually a true story of something that happened to my dad, in which he, let's just say, he ruffled the feathers of the most powerful person in the world. And this is many, many decades ago, so I don't want to get into a political battle or anything like that. I'm not going to say which president of the United States, several decades ago, but it was during this person's administration. My dad is a scientist. He's a retired scientist for the EPA. And one of the things that he would do is he would test out herbicides, different chemicals to make sure that they're helpful for the environment. They actually don't harm things but help things, and they kill the right sort of weeds. They don't harm the crop. But he was testing one from a particular company that was very, very wealthy and powerful and was making a whole profit on this particular chemical. This chemical, as he studied it, he noticed that as it was going up, it would help and help and help. But the moment the soy and the corn would reach a certain growth level, it would turn. It would sort of like mutate, transform, and then kill the thing. And then everything would die. It was this horrible chemical. So he's looking at it, and he's like, I don't think this thing should be out in the public. And so he wrote a critique of it as a scientist, as an analyst of that particular project, saying this thing needs to be tested more, because if you put this out, you're going to be killing whole crops out there. And unfortunately, that company and that president was very much linked to the then president of the United States and was a big supporter financially. And so my dad's boss, so the guy right above my dad, got a phone call from the then President of the United States asking, can you figure out how to make this work? This particular analyst of yours, so my dad actually got in trouble, this particular scientist of yours is causing a lot of trouble with my friend. And we need to sort of figure out how to make this work. And so that chemical then went on to the official registry of chemicals for the EPA, saying it is good for the environment. Now my dad still had the report and said, I'm not pulling it back, because this is what it is, and you can go along with this, but you're going to hurt a lot of crops, a lot of farmers. They said, okay, well that's nice. So anyway, that particular year, it was several decades back, probably happened in this area, but I know in Iowa and Idaho, in that area, the crop went up. But just like what my dad said, at a certain age level, anyone who had that crop, all of a sudden the chemical turned and just killed the crop. And then all the farmers are looking, being like, what is going on here? And so that company actually had to recant and do a whole callback and got into trouble and stuff like that. And so my dad was commended in the very, very end. But it really kind of opened his eyes to see the danger of when we have earthly power, but we don't know how to use it wisely. Do you see how that person, and also the boss of my dad, made decisions that were actually against the very science of helping people and helping crops? Wisdom helps us know how to be able to look at that and say, yes, even though I feel like I have this power, I can do it, this will be profitable for me, it doesn't mean that we always should do it. Because we always have to think about the whole situation, and wisdom helps us rise above and be able to look at all the consequences, all the situation, and also help us understand our own heart to see, where am I being driven? Wisdom helps us understand where our own heart is, and where maybe our own treasure is, and then it guides us to say, why are you seeking this? Only He can be your treasure, and only by following Him and what is true, good, and beautiful will you be able to finally find happiness and also help others to discover peace in this world.